bi-weekly EHS community webinar. We're always so happy to have you all here. We're especially happy to have our three wonderful panelists join us. And so let's get right to them. So this is self-inspections. How should we use them best? A great question that the panelists are going to help us with. And so I'll just welcome them, and I'll do my own very brief intro. I'm Jonathan Klain. I'm our Director of Risk Management. Took me a second. What am I the Director of? Risk Management and Safety Education here at BioRaft, trying to create some wonderful content for all of you out there. And I think that's good. Former EHS person, still an EHS person, I don't know. Used to work at a couple of universities, used to be a consultant, used to be a professor, used to be a lot of stuff, I guess. And I think that's more than enough from me. So welcome everyone. Let's do intros. I will just go right across my screen to make it easy on myself and our panelists, and I'll ask Loan-Anh to introduce herself first, please.
All right. Well, good morning or good afternoon to wherever you are in the world or in the country. Well, pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation, John. It's nice to be here to talk with the panelists, Josanne and Stacey's, and with you all. I'm from UC Davis. I'm in Northern California. I am part of the Lab Safety Review Group. I work for Environment, Health, and Safety. I does the annual inspections for lab safeties, for controlled substance, as well as low-level radiations. So I get an opportunity to visit many of the labs on campus, and that's the joy of this job.
All right, thanks so much, Loan-Anh, and it's a pleasure to see you again. And going from my left to my right, Josanne, you're right in the middle on my screen, so please.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan. Hi, everybody. I'm Josanne Hollingsworth-Maida, and I'm the Laboratory and Laser Safety Officer here at Florida Atlantic University on the East Coast of Florida. I'm responsible for the overall safety of our research labs and our academic labs throughout the East Coast here at FAU.
Florida Atlantic, neat, very cool. All right, and please, Stacy.
My name is Stacy Barnett. I live in the Seattle area, and I am responsible for environmental health and safety at the ultrasound level. That's the business unit that I work for within Health and Airs. Right now, I primarily have responsibility for who I lovingly refer to as our mad scientists in the R&D labs. And then the technology transfer to the manufacturing facilities. So lots of management of change with respect to R&D activities that involve the labs.
Very neat. I'm pretty sure I have benefited from some of Siemens Healthineers equipment in various scans I have had over the years. So on behalf of me, thank you for providing that. All right, well, let's jump into it. You know, one of the things that we really want to focus on is, where do we even start, right? What are your all perspectives on the various ways we use or encourage self-inspections as opposed to inspections by someone else? And just to mix it up, I'll ask Josanne to go first.
At FAU, we have several labs, and for me as an individual, it's hard for me to be in all of the labs, a couple hundreds of labs. So the self-inspection is used to be their eyes and feet on the ground for lab personnel, and also to help them take accountability for the lab and their safety in general in the lab.
Great. Okay, thanks. Good start. Stacy, do you mind going next, please?
Sure. Building on what Josanne said, there is no way that EHS can be everywhere all the time. you have to rely on the people who own the processes to learn to recognize things that are happening in their lab before they become problematic. And so we use the management system and self-inspections to get the lab users engaged in owning their own environmental health and safety and getting them becoming aware of what's around them. They tend to be a little myopic on their research and sometimes don't see the bigger picture. And we also have a challenge with different groups sharing the same lab. So getting a bunch of engineers to talk to each other is part of the self-inspection. And let's just leave it at that. It's part of the challenge.
Yeah, that might be the safest point to leave it at that. Having directed safety at 2 colleges of engineering, I'm laughing with you, that's for sure. And Loan-Anh, I know you can relate to the whole issue of engineers and all of that. So what about your perspectives on this, please, too?
Thank you. Yes, I totally can relate. That's actually my training. So I know those folks really well. So for me, being an inspector, what I always recommend the lab to do is the best way for you to prepare for the inspection when night comes out is to do that self-inspection. Is because it basically helps take you through everything in terms of looking at your programs, making sure your documentations are up to date, that they're in place, that you can find them, and that you go through the lab. It gives you a guide of finding out, have I checked the safety or safety showers I washed lately, and it's just a reminder, a good guide for you to go through and look at everything, because the self-inspection checklist we have here is actually quite comprehensive. It's like 130 questions, so it's comprehensive, it's extensive, but it really covers all the different hazards that you can possibly have in the lab. So I always a good guide to make sure that you're up to date.
Yeah, definitely a good starting point. And people are already starting to post questions in the Q&A, which is wonderful. So working on this challenge of communicating with and amongst some of the people, what do you tell them when they ask about the purpose of the self-inspection or the benefits? How do you help them, be it like the mad scientists, the engineers, others, etc. Maybe see the benefits, these lessons that they learn and the outcomes, those sorts of things, maybe even time to closure, that sort of stuff. And this time I'll ask Stacy, if you don't mind going first, please.
Oh boy, what a time to be first.
A lot there.
That's a lot in that question. I think where I started when I came to ultrasound was building the personal relationships and building the trust. This particular site where I stood at was the result of benign neglect. They hadn't had full-time EHS in the building for a while. So to be fair to the engineers, they really did want to learn. And so in that spirit, they were open to learning about common hazards in the labs. So initially when I came on board, they had already, attempted to set up monthly walkthroughs of their own labs, but they didn't really have somebody to help them learn to recognize things that had been staring them right in the face. So through EHS participation in their walkthroughs, not owning it, but being a consulting partner with them and the other lab users, pointing out things, giving them information because they were eager to learn. So leverage that, right? And I think building that relationship with the lab users, me participating in their lab manager meetings, which they took the initiative to set up. I think that's really helped. And We're still working on the multi-lab user communication thing, but it gets better, right? I think it's just a process. And the other great thing that we've been able to get buy-in, because this goes towards, I'm using management system terminology, right? Worker participation. We've gotten them to buy into the fact that it's important to put all of the things that they find that are related to EHS into our tracking tool, so that we can look at them as an organization and say, okay, what are our trends? Share the learnings across the lab. I think it really does help.
Yeah, and let's get to data probably next. That's great. That's a good start to it. Loan-Anh next, I guess.
For being an inspector, I guess we'll get the compliance out of the way. It's first of all, self-inspection is part of the requirement, and everyone asks, why do we do this? And my first question is, Cal OSHA, this is a Cal OSHA requirement. It's part of the IIPP, it needs to be done. So we'll get that one out, but really going beyond that, the self-inspection is, I don't involve in the day-to-day activity with the lab, but I serve as a resource. I make myself available. We have a what we call the new faculty, new supervisor onboarding programs here that my supervisor manage, and I'm part of it as well, is that we help any kind of new researcher, new principal investigators that comes on board, having a new lab set up in terms of getting the safety program going, going over all the different requirements, showing them the resources and where they can find that information or who to reach out when they need help. So getting that established in the beginning so that they feel comfortable reaching out to us when they need help. But also, I am also available to walk the lab with them when they do the self-inspection for the first time. And that's helpful because I think it could be a lot of time, different, the way the checklist is written, it could be interpreted in many different ways. And I can help point them in kind of, I guess, understanding what these items, what these questionnaires mean and what should they be looking for, etc. So I think that's helpful for the lab. And yeah, I totally agree that building trust, and so that everyone feel comfortable reaching out when they need help is important for us.
Yeah, great. And Josanne, what about your experiences there at FAU?
The same for me. Trust is a big thing. Having a good relationship with the PIs, as we call them, or lab personnel, getting their buy-in. It's mandatory to do it, but having them understand the importance of it, walking them through the self-inspections, and that allows for them to see why it needs to be done, why it's important, not just for me, but for them as well. The relationship is the biggest part for me, and attitude of servitude and good customer service.
Yeah, my years in engineering in academia were as an embedded safety professional, and I agree with what you're saying, Josanne. The relationship that you establish is just so key, so important to it. But let's follow up on this topic that Stacy mentioned as well, which is, what about trending data? And what do you see? How do you take actions, and what are the benefits of it? And we left off with Josanne, so I'll go right back to Josanne again, just to mix things up.
So for me at FAU, we just started using BioRaft, but trending data we took from our systems prior, and the self-inspection questions were generated, not all of them, but some of them were generated based on the trending data. What do I see reoccurring a lot? What do we need work? Which areas do we need to focus on? So those questions were definitely put on the self-inspection as ways to get everybody to buy into, maybe this is something we need to work on. Or is it something that we need to keep in compliance, whether it's for liability, for the law, or for policy purposes?
Great, cool. Loan-Anh.
So what we do here at UC Davis, our program manager take the data that we collect as part of the review programs and basically sort of, you know, put it together in a way that's easy to understand. For what we show, also I can share the website for you, is that the sort of how many sort of findings we find for each of the departments. It breaks down by the departments, and then it breaks down by the school or the college, etc. So we can kind of see that, and then so that data is good and important for the chair, perhaps, of the department to see how are they doing that year and what can they improve on. We also use that information in the training class. We offer training class every quarter to all the new managers, new PI, etc., whoever wanted to participate. We basically pull that information and say, here are the top findings, or here's the you know, where we're lacking that could be improved, so that everyone's aware of it and that they can be better prepared, so that they can be successful next time. So that's what we want. It's you know, is for everyone to be successful.
Great. Yeah. All right. And Stacy, what about you were starting to get into it. So very curious there at Health and Ears about the use of data from their inspections.
I think every business area and business line is doing it a little bit differently, but we all use the same global tool. It's not all the way rolled out globally yet, but it will be. I don't remember what the timeline is. We adopt this new tool, and I'm not. This is just the tool we use. I don't mean to be advertising or promoting anybody, but we use Corey. And so within the ultrasound business unit, the requirement as part of the management system is that labs do monthly walkthroughs. We use the term lab in a much broader sense. We don't just have chemical labs. We have engineering labs. We have hardware labs. You know, we have acoustic labs, right? Because ultrasound uses acoustics. And so there's a lab manager who is designated for each lab. And that lab manager is responsible for setting up the walkthroughs. Most of the labs are monthly, some don't have to be, but then the requirement is that the lab manager, as part of his or her responsibility, enters the EHS findings from the walkthroughs into the tool. You know, EHS is there as a resource to help with the tool because everybody is still in learning mode. What we're doing is, I'm literally this week, I spent 3 hours with the expert learning how to run reports. So I have not gotten it all the way done yet, but I've got certain groups within the business that are clamoring for data. They want to report it on their boards at their daily stand-ups. So they're asking for the data, and quite honestly, I have to learn how to generate it.
Yeah. Always a learning curve, right? But I mean, everyone wants data. And of course, for me, it's always, how does the data help us take action, right? It should be actionable data. So this is neat. Let's continue. So one of the questions that we all discussed before that Ashley has asked about, and Patrick and Mary have also sort of contributed to a little discussion in the Q&A, is, I'll say, accountability. We talked about accountability. It's a challenge. How do you help it? How do you facilitate it? You know, Ashley's question, which Patrick commented on as well, checking the box or pencil whipping the form, as it's often called, as opposed to really making this such a useful tool as we intend it to be. So maybe we can talk about that. and I'll actually start where I left off with Stacy.
It's a valid point, right? Checklists have their purposes. One of the things that you have to be careful of is that, unlike, the checklist that Loan-Anh describes, ours aren't that extensive. They're there as memory devices for the lab managers to use or the department to use if that's what they choose. EHS has encouraged them to make their own checklist because it's a memory trigger for them. But we also have conversations during the walkthroughs, don't narrow your scope. Remember, this is just something to look at. So that's where we are right now. Checklists have value, but making sure that they don't exclude anything that's not on the checklist, I think is what I'm working on right now.
Awesome. That's great. I'm just going to go back across because that's easy on my brain at this point. So Josanne, if you don't mind going next on this part, please.
For FAU, we have the checklist, yes, and it's done monthly by the PI. There is an annual in each EHS inspection that I do with the lab and the PI is there to make sure that they're not checking it off merely just to check it off. I do have surprise visits, and also I hold them to an honor code. Like honesty is the best policy because at the end of the day, it's helping you to be in a safe environment. So if you see something, say something is the policy at FAU throughout all departments. So if you see something, say something. So that's applied to the checklist.
Cool, great. All right. And Loan-Anh, what about your experiences with this, getting them to really own it as opposed to just do it, as a matter of form?
Right. So yeah, there are a great number of folks who would ask a checklist for anything that in terms of regulatory requirements and all of that. And so what I try to do in my role is when I visit the lab, I always checked in with the researcher asking how did it go with the cell inspection. That's kind of something I always checked in. I know that they've done it. It's not something that we look into, but I make it a point to ask how did it go. Is there any question that I can answer? Is there anything that I can help with to explain or further, explores? Is there anything that your lab may need that didn't get addressed in these checklists that I am here that we can discuss and talk, and maybe if you need more resource that I can, find them and bring them to you perhaps. So that's what I try to do because yes, you're right. A checklist could be very dry and and may not be it doesn't not all of it cannot cover all the hazard possible in all the lab, especially if you talked about engineering's lab. Engineering has they would create all kind of devices that you've never seen before. They will fabricate it, anything latest and greatest and new. That's the thing that they want to explore and wants to push the boundary. So there's always something interesting to see.
Yeah, it's how I started my undergrad career, geological engineering, and I've worked for more engineers than any other discipline. It's a very interesting breed, I guess I will say, and I'm part of it. So go figure. So I want to ask each of our panelists a special question for each of them. So I'm just going to go back across. So Loan-Anh, if you could just briefly, I know that during COVID you did a lot of remote lab reviews for their self-inspections. Could you just briefly touch upon how that actually went and helped with continuity or anything else?
Right. So when COVID hits and the campus announced that we needed to shut down, so we literally doesn't have that much time. Everything that I had in plan, I have to all cancel. So I cannot visit the labs anymore, and the labs are shutting down. So everyone is trying to scramble around, trying to figure out how do we even shut down a lab, and go dormant, and we don't even know how long this is going to take. So for our Canvas, we the Canvas Ready committee generated again a checklist for everyone to help with the ramping down process. How do you make sure that everything is going to be left in a condition that won't cause any issues when you return. There are many things that you need to take care of. Your waste, your equipment, how do you shut them down? So make sure that there's power outage during this time, that it will not ruin your equipment when you come back, etc. For the inspection program, we also incorporate self-inspection. Actually, I should backtrack a little bit. Our team quickly got together and decided how, if we cannot go and visit the lab in person, how do we make sure that the labs still get the support they need for those that are still working and for those that are working remotely. So we have a remote inspection program. Basically, we want to maintain that the lab still can update any documents that they can do offline, such as the IIP, the Injury and Illness Prevention Program, the Emergency, I have to correct myself, the Emergency Action Plan, any documentations that are important that can still be maintained and updated while you're working remotely. Those are the ones we make sure that's in place. Any training that can still be done, via Zooms, that still need to take place. The self-inspection, the remote self-inspection is a tricky one. For my recommendations to all the lab to fulfill that is to say, use that checklist sort of as a guide for you to say, these are the things that I needed to look when I come back to the lab. That's kind of how you will want to use that checklist really. For those any item that, so that you can be ready, because if we want you to come back and be ready to go and not have to spend a whole lot of time trying to, sort out all the training requirements before everyone can even start working. Yeah. So for anything that needed to check when you come back, use that self-inspection, make notes for yourself, and that's where you're going to deposit it until you need it.
Great, thanks. Josanne, what about your experience at Florida Atlantic and any benefits from the monthly self-inspections that you all do there?
So the monthly inspection, I've seen a paradigm change or shift in the attitudes towards health and safety in general. Before, the PIs were reactionary, so to speak, but now they're proactive. So it's been a great addition to or department and to the school itself.
That's great. Thank you. Stacy, I wanted to ask, because someone reached out in the chat too, your posted answer to the what one bit of advice was neat. Brevity is wit, right? Stop pushing the rope. And you and I had a nice conversation about it. I get it, but do you mind going into a little bit of detail about what you mean by that phrase? Because it's a really cool phrase.
It is, and I can't take credit for it. One of my favorite managers ever on the planet looked at me one day at a previous employer and he goes, "Stacy, don't push the rope." And I looked at him and basically, think about pushing a rope. It's just an ineffective way to do anything. Mm-hmm. You have to pull the rope. So, and what he meant was that EHS can't own individual safety. It's not an effective way to get EHS embedded in the work that anyone does. So basically it's Don't take ownership of things that aren't yours to own. Build the relationships, build the trust, get the employees to do it themselves, and then use you as a business partner. And so that's what he meant. And so it's a lot easier to just say, don't push the rope. It's a reminder to yourself, right? Because you want to help. It's what we do. You want to help, but sometimes helping is not the way to do it. You have to get somebody to do it for themselves and then help them do it.
Yeah, it's a great euphemism, saying, metaphor, choose whatever descriptor you want. I think it's really good. When you said that's what you wanted to have for your answer, I thought, oh, this is good. We'll have to have more of a conversation.
Yeah.
But
And by the way, his
yeah.
name was Mike Verhart. His name still is Mike Verhart. But he was the one who said, "Don't push the rope." So.
Always nice to give credit where credit is due. I think that this is in the theme of what I know I've always been intrigued by, and others I think are somewhat asking. So how does personalizing it make it any easier? And by personalizing it, you can go in whatever direction you would like, but I'd offer a couple of thoughts. One, so allowing or asking or facilitating a lab or an entity or whatever to tweak or design their own self-inspection. Is that something that you found to be valuable to Loan-Anh's and everyone's comments about engineers in particular, doing very widely different things? And then also personalizing it, the relationship, the relatability that I think Josanne mentioned as well. So go in whatever direction you wish, but does giving them the nudge to really own it in their own self-designed way? What have been your experiences? And I'll ask Josanne to kick us off on this one, please.
So for FAU, we have a very diverse set of labs. Like Stacy, we have engineering, biomed, chem. Our labs are not necessarily defined as chemical labs per se. So for the self-inspection, I designed it so that it covers everybody across the board. And if one of the features with it is if it's not applicable to the lab, then all they have to do is select NA, but personalizing it creates more works, so to speak, for me trying to manage everybody's safety throughout. So having one generalized form, it's so much easier. I know what to expect from certain labs based on the type of lab.
Sure, and then maybe, there's, I've seen plenty of the checklist. Often it's, whatever is not applicable, just check NA,
Yeah,
right?
NA.
Yeah, NA covers a lot of ground, I think. Stacy, what about your experiences at Siemens Healthineers with this?
And remember, it's ultrasound, so I can't speak for all of Healthineers
Oh,
because there's
ultrasound,
thousands
yes.
of us all over the world. I think that at least for this group of individuals, allowing them the latitude to create their own checklists has empowered them in ways that I don't think they would have responded to if I'd have said, here's your checklist, do it. It's a group of highly intelligent people. They have a lot of initials after their name, and having them check, NA on things, and we've had these frank conversations. They'll go, that's stupid, I'm not going to do it. Okay, I understand that. So what would work for you? What do you think would be a valuable tool for you to use? So in your busy days, when you're taking the time out of your day to do the walkthrough, what do you want to use to remind you about what you need to do? And so at least that with this culture and this group of individuals, that has worked best here. It's helped, I really do think it's helped them own it. But I don't think that there's one set solution for every environment. I can't imagine being in a university and letting each lab do their own checklist. That way lies madness. Can't even imagine it. So,
Crazy.
but that works for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it right when you said, it's got to be what works for the culture that you have. And I was just thinking, talk about data. What would that data set look like? The most useful bit of that data set might be just frequency of the self-inspections, but also how much are people finding things that they're then taking action on, right? Spotting deficiencies, hazards, whatever the thing is. And Loan-Anh, and what about for your experience? And I know, now, you've been in different units at the university and of course in EHS representing engineering, which is sort of a weird agglomeration of widely varying groups. So I was very curious about your experiences with this.
For the most part, as being an EHS unit department, we have a standard sets of questions that we provide to everyone to say, these are your guide, these are what you can use in terms of looking for hazards, identifying anything that needed to be fixed in your facility. So yes, it's exactly what you say, that if everyone has their own checklist, it would be very, very challenging to work with. But the flexibility that they have also is, for those who prefer to do it online or for those who prefer to do it on paper, and we still have that options. But for me also is that standardized, yes, that's what we require to everyone to have, but we're not really everyone in the labs, or the labs are that they have that flexibility to create a checklist also that works with them as well to supplement what we have. So I would say if they have a unique process or unique piece of equipment that they need to maintain or work with, then yes, definitely that's what you wanted to do, is you want to create that checklist that works with for your needs. So if you have particular needs, that's what you would want it to do. And then we also, I've seen how folks are being creative about how they approach the self-inspection, of how they performed it. Some would do, a certain sections at a certain time. Some would take the whole checklist. Some would, I've asked folks across the board, and I had lab manager told me that, yeah, we do needed to, this extensive checklist is long, but they do needed to do that often because the research changed very quickly. So they may introduce a new hazard, they may introduce something new to the lab, and if they don't go through it, they may miss something that's important.
Yep. Yeah, very, very good. And I do see in the Q&A that along these lines, Nikki has indicated that they're working on their self-inspection. So any that you all wish to contribute to that, and people can always post a link in the chat. That's usually the easiest thing to do. So if you're able to, panelists, but also attendees, please feel free to do so. You can also upload forms into the chat as well, and then people can always download them from there. And I think we have some resources that you all have contributed on the website for this webinar as well. But I think a lot of this gets at, and a lot of you have been, well, all three of you have been talking about people. So let's talk about the people side of this some more, right? So what we do in EH&S and risk is really about people. If it weren't for our people, I don't think they would have us, right? So how do you help these mad scientists, engineers, these very, very smart technical people see this importance? And to what extent is it through the self-inspections that it also gets somewhat focused on actions of people, not just conditions in the lab, but also sort of the group dynamics or group norms. So that's kind of a lot to give you, to feel free to go in any direction. You don't have to hit all of those different points, right? So I don't know who wants to go first. this time. I can't remember where I've left off or whatever. So I'm just going to go right to the middle again. So that's you, Josanne.
Oh, I had to think on that one. But with people, can we come back to me?
We can, absolutely.
Because I have to think about that one.
Never a
If
problem.
If you don't mind, John, would you start quickly
Yeah.
kind of summarize what you just said? I think.
Yeah, let me, because I kind of went all over the place, which I tend to do. So really, how do we help our people, meaning the ones in the labs, see the benefits of really focusing on their own people? And so does the self-inspection process itself help them address what's going on in the lab from a people, action, group norm standpoint, as opposed to merely conditions in the lab, things in place, et cetera? Does that help, and does that make sense?
I can actually speak to that a little
Please.
bit.
Thanks, Stacy.
If anybody had ever told me in school that I'd be an EHS manager during a pandemic, I thought they were nuts. But I think that one of the things that the pandemic has done has focused on the interactions of the people who share the lab for multiple reasons. And what they have actually done at their own initiative, right? Because they're shared labs and you have engineers in different groups using them, is they have, and you know, there's always differences of opinion between labs, and they have different focuses and different goals. But when, and you know, you'd come into a lab and somebody made a big mess, and then, you know, the people that came in afterwards say, I mean, that's not my mess, I'm not cleaning it up. It's almost, you know, like talking to my kids. But what the self-inspections have done is they have, in the meetings that they have where they do the self-inspections, they have invited people from other labs. And so they see from a broader perspective the way that how they use the lab and how that affects their teammates. Because we are all one big team. I mean, we can, you know, be whatever part of any group that you report up to, but we're all, you know, we're all one team. And I think that the lab inspections, the way that they have been organized in the pandemic, with including people from other labs, has helped them form relationships that I don't think they had before. And when you form relationships with those people, you start to care. Mm-hmm. And so I think that has helped us, quite honestly. And I don't know that if we would have done it that way pre-pandemic, because Great. You know, building occupancy was diminished. So you reached out to the people to help, and I really do think that helped.
Great, no, a wonderful answer. And Loan-Anh, why don't you go next briefly, if you would, touch upon this.
Thank you, Stacy. I really like that you say, you know, working with other, building relationships, and you start to care. I'm going to remember that one. So what I see is that I actually really liked it when there are more than one individual getting together and completing, you know, working on the self-inspection. To me, that's always shows team, you know, team spirits, you know, teamwork, sort of collaborations, because that's basically is the best. It's when I hear that, you know, again, like I mentioned earlier, I've asked, you know, the lab, you know, how did it go? You know, how did you do that? And when I hear that, you know, oh, we got together and we did it, you know, everyone owned the sections of the lab and they go through and they did that. Or they say, oh, you know, so-and-so check a sections of the checklist and they worked on it. To me, it's great also for anyone that's new to the lab to be a part of that, because then it's team building experience. It's sort of like a bonding experience, really, for you as a new person, because you take part of it. You learn about the safety culture of the lab, but also at the same time, you're learning about the work cultures of your new your new group. Really, I think that's
Great.
to me, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, great. All right. And Josanne, back to you. What about your experiences with this aspect of it?
Well, the people in the lab take turns doing it. So remember, I'm coming from academia and research. So these are all new researchers in the lab. So they're not very versed on the safety culture or what to expect. This is their probably first time in the lab. So them taking turns doing it teaches them also what to look for, how to approach a lab. So when they leave the school and go into the real world, then they'll have this experience.
That's great. Cool. All right. Well, it's already quarter of the hour or a little bit past that now. So we are going to transition to the rest of the Q&A. And I'm going to ask my counterpart, Chris, to please launch our topic poll. So there you go. All right. Thank you so much, Chris. So we value everyone's vote. Panelists, I'm so sorry you don't get to vote. I don't get to vote either. Yeah. Well, you can always reach out to me personally. Anyone can. But for everyone attending, please do let us know which topics you would be the most interested in seeing. Chris and I both look at these numbers every webinar. It's one of the first things I'm most curious about is this. And then, of course, are you interested in being a panelist? Do you know someone who is? That's certainly some of the way that we end up finding our panelists are getting really neat suggestions. So please do contribute to that. And speaking of future ones, let me share my screen once more. You still have the poll, I believe, yes. And there are our next three webinars coming up. We are doing one on biosecurity. What should we be concerned about? Oops, sorry about that. If you lost it for a second there. And then that's on November the 4th. My goodness, we're already getting into November, people. And then after that, a couple of weeks later, mid-November, a week before Thanksgiving, so US Thanksgiving, hopefully you can join us. Leading indicators, what are they good for? That should be an interesting discussion. And then this other one in December, safety culture, a JEDI approach via organizational culture. And JEDI as an acronym stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So not so much a Star Wars reference, except those who originated that acronym, of course, playing a little tongue-in-cheek with that. So a really neat set of discussions coming up, I believe, trying to find these interesting topics. Well, cool. I think that we've probably done a good job of that. So I've got to now go back to the Q&A. Way too many things on my screen. There we go. Got it. And so we have a bunch of questions that I think are somewhat related, if I understand them all. And those of you who asked, feel free to nuance them if I'm getting it wrong. I see Patrick's, how is traceable resolution? So I think, how do we follow up and see that it's been followed up, right? Of any non-attainment areas. So I'm not sure if non-attainment is really specific to environmental, or if Patrick's really getting at things that we can't always access. I'm not sure if it's how specific it is to EPA definitions or really just more of a generic term uncovered during this process. How is that achieved and documented? So why don't, and there's a few others in this general area, but why don't I do them one at a time? Because I think we have a little bit of time. So maybe a quick answer from each of you if you can. And I cannot remember where. I'm going to go back to, hang on. Patrick just put something in the chat. Anything falling short of code. Thank you very much, Patrick. I appreciate that. Yeah, so not the EPA non-attainment areas. Josanne, please, do you mind going first?
So for us, it's a university setting. So if it's not within code, then we probably can find it in the policies. So then we would reference that instead.
Okay, great. And Stacy, what about for you all in ultrasound?
Sorry, I'm not even sure I understand the question because, sorry, but
well, I think it's how do we create a mechanism by which, if they're doing self-inspections, how does the reporting out go? And if they have found a deficiency or something wrong, how do we ensure that we're really able to see that things are being followed up on? That's my interpretation of it. Or things that fall short of a code specifically that might need to still be followed up on. They're not compliance issues, but still they're problematic.
And Patrick just said correct. So
yeah, I saw that pop up on my screen. I'm so glad the chat does that. It pops up so I can see it without clicking.
We actually that's what I'm hoping to use this tool for, this reporting tool.
Yeah.
You know, and part of it is, you know, EHS has to up my learning curve. But I can tell you that one group, even though they have paper records with the checklist that they themselves generated for the 2 areas that they're responsible for. And what they do on their walkthrough is they always, until I got the electronic reports up and running, is they take the paper from the last inspection and they go over what they looked at previously to see if it's been resolved or not.
Great. And Ashley, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Stacey.
No, that's okay. So that's what they're doing. And the metrics that we're running now is, I'm trying to run, let me put that way, that I'm trying to run is, you know, of all the incidents and the good observations that have been made, what ones have been addressed and how long has it taken to close those. So we're tracking the open ones and time to closure. And then, you know, the important thing is identifying what's a problem across all of the different labs.
Right.
Right. And you know, when we have that, and we've got a non-conformance that's system-wide, then we'll have some kind of special emphasis conversation about it. I mean, I've already seen some things that are trending across all the labs. So
right. And you know, it's interesting, the 3 of you actually work at places where you're using 3 different platforms. And we're, as I've said before many a time, we're very agnostic on these. It's not at all part of our, you know, try to sales or anything, but each one, ours of course included, has mechanisms to track and to follow up on things. I want to make sure I get to Loan-Anh as well, because I'm tending to lose track of who has spoken up and who hasn't yet.
So for us, the follow-up for the self-inspections falls on the responsibility of the group that does the self-inspection. And that is also encourage them to, you know, take that responsibility, do that, and also have that freedom of you know, identifying what needs to be done. Because I think if EH&S looked at those results, folks tend to for certain folks, they don't feel comfortable. We want labs to be honest and do that self-inspection to the best of their knowledge. If there's anything they find that they identified it. And really, I think that's one of the reasons why we have the lab tech review is, again, to ensure that we go into the lab and look at things that still need to be identified.
Right. Yeah, Ashley posted in the chat that she created a network of focal points. I like that phrase, for each lab, and they meet quarterly and review the corrective actions and results from previous audits. So that, I'm sure, is also a mechanism. I know I've spoken with other peers and colleagues who do these sort of, I think, quarterly, sometimes monthly group meetings, go over findings, sharing of findings, things like that. And that seems to be a lot of the basis of the questions that are going on here. So let me go to this one that's been in the Q&A for a while. I want to make sure I address those. So C. Strader asks, what, if any, experiences do others have with internal audit groups wanting a means to identify and record various departments' compliance efforts? And so do the self audits interact with outside group reviews? And so is there an interplay, an interaction between what someone might do internally and externally? And I'm actually going to, I hate to, but it's called double barreling this. Darwin asked, does anyone have the department lab coordinator, et cetera, send a copy of it? So I think really what these two questions are getting at is, what is the interaction or interplay between what the group itself generates for its own internal purposes versus what it generates for external tracking, and how do those two, maybe any reflexivity between them? How does the internal affect what EHS groups are looking at, and what EHS groups are looking at affect the internal? And if I've gone too long and made it too broad, ask me again to cut it down to a focal point. I will start with Stacy this time.
I think we may have a terminology challenge, because in my world, internal audit means the internal auditor pool, because we are ISO certified for 14001 and 45001. But using that as my perspective, because that was a pretty broad question.
It was.
Our internal auditors look at the data. And remember, our inspections are all, we record them, whether it's a good observation, and if it's large enough non-conformance, then we could open a corrective action and track it through our corrective action tool, which is separate, right? And it gets different visibility because it's more than the local owners are required to, find it and fix it, right? If it's more complicated than a find it, fix it, it can go into corrective action. Or if there's a trend in data across the labs and it's a problem for the whole system, then instead of it being a local problem, then it becomes a system problem, and then it's also entered into the corrective action tool. But the way that we operate, all of that has visibility. And if we generate a record, then it's visible not only to our business area, but it's also available for the global EHS community. And the data is tracked globally. So that's one of the beautiful things about tools, right? Not only can you, the internal, because you've got to have something that's an outcome of the self-inspections for it to get any kind of traction, for anything that's not small, right? So, I think everybody on the planet has problems with secondary container labeling. But things that are bigger than that, then, but it's all visible. We're pretty open about it. So we air our laundry so the global community can see it.
Nice, very good. All right, and Josanne, what about at FAU?
Adding to Stacy's comment, also it brings visibility for us, and within our department as EHS, and also those who want to see, like, we're a state college, so it's public knowledge. So other departments can see it if it's requested, and it gives a form of matrix to see how well we're doing, how well this college is doing, because we are broken up into several colleges, how well each department is doing.
Great. All right. And Loan-Anh, a wrap on this question?
Yeah. Sorry about that. So for us, I guess internal, it could be internal to a research group. It's internal to EH&S. Right now, there's not really an interplay between those. The information that we have, it's available upon requests, and it's available to the research lab anytime they need it. But anything that's done in the lab, it is internal to their lab. It's not something that we look for unless it's needed.
Great. Well, we've hit the hour, and as usual, we still have a few questions to go. Hopefully our panelists can continue here, and those of you who don't have to go to your next Zoom or whatever meeting can continue on for a few more minutes here. And we appreciate everyone on this webinar. And so there's a couple of questions here. Ashley wants to, and they relate again, Ashley wants to know, do you have labs inspect each other's labs? So, I will say sort of like a round robin approach to it that can have benefits. It can be a challenge, I guess, in many ways. And then Mary asked, when you have shared spaces, and this was always a challenge for me, where I was at times, how is it decided who performs the inspections? So there's a little bit of both of those, I think, related in that question. And I'll actually reverse the order, I guess, and ask Loan-Anh to go first on that. Any challenges of shared spaces and any labs inspecting each other along those lines?
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, shared lab is always a challenge because it's a matter of, who's maintaining and who's trying to stay up to date, and how do you hold someone responsible if there's a safety issues or something not taken care of. I think the other challenge with lab inspecting each other lab could possibly be in the research realm. There are research procedures, products that are proprietary, and some lab may not be open to that in terms of trying to keep their research, while they're developing it, it's more private.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And Stacy, what about from your perspective on this?
From an ultrasound perspective, that's why we don't necessarily have one lab group inspect another lab group, but we have members from other labs that are on the inspection team they share the responsibility. So you have lab A, and that self-inspection team includes members from lab B and lab C.
Okay, neat.
In a different environment, and to speak a little bit to what Loan-Anh said, it could be dangerous to do that because some labs, there are some things that some labs have that are incredibly hazardous and that people in another lab would not really understand how to address it. So I'm not sure that would be a great idea if there's a big difference in the work that's being done. But I think sharing the membership of the self-inspection team with other labs is a good alternative.
Yeah, the benefits of the multidisciplinary team have been pretty obvious. Yeah, great. And Josanne, what about from your perspective on these challenges of shared labs and whether or not the benefits of different groups inspecting each other's?
Well, we do have shared lab spaces, but shared in a broad sense, but each person or each lab group is assigned a bay, and they're responsible for that bay. So when doing the self-inspections, they only do what's within their bay. With respect to others inspecting each other's spaces, we don't have that currently here.
Yeah, it's an
not
interesting.
with monthly inspections, at least.
Yeah, gotcha. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
I can understand the concept, and I think it comes back to what you all discussed earlier, culture. Is it a good fit? Does it make sense? Would it work out well? To Josanne, when you were saying about, a very large lab, perhaps with multiple bays, I can picture that back when I was at Arizona State, and the definition of whose is what is very good there, except of course for core services where there are tools, et cetera, that everyone accesses, or a separate ante room or something like that. But then other larger labs that are more boxy, more square, and they're not divided into bays, those can be a challenge as far as, this isn't my space, this is someone else's, this isn't my mess, this wasn't ours, that sort of finger pointing I've also sadly experienced. All right, well, let me ask another one here. We have a few good ones. Here's one. So what about back to the issue and challenge of accountability? Darwin asked, would copying a department head on completed self-inspections provide better accountability? PIs, lab coordinators, et cetera, in response. And if the self-inspection isn't submitted or does not appear complete, then it could be escalated. So I'd be very curious about that. Is it turning the self-inspection into something that gets perceived as punitive, or does it have good advantages in, as Darwin is asking, the accountability aspects of that? And I'm lost as far as who to go first, so I'm going left to right. So we're down to the wire on minutes, so a nice brief answer from each will work out well. Loan-Anh.
That's not how we treat the self-inspection here. The encouragement is that it is done, with the way it's the responsibility of the lab, and we wanted to have them to have that understanding that you're free to use it to your needs, and it's not a punishment. It's an encouragement to do that. So yeah, we don't want to use that to punish others because we want to encourage people to do it.
Here's this wonderful thing. I'm going to beat you with it now, right? Yeah. Josanne, what about at FAU?
The same. It's used as a tool to help the labs, see what's necessary to maintain their health and safety and compliance within the lab, so that we do not copy department heads on the self-inspection if there are issues.
And Stacy, final wrap on this question. I think we may get one more question in.
I think you have to be careful with escalation and do it in a thoughtful manner, because you don't want to beat people over the head with it, right? You need to get the engagement. In our system, it's the lab manager's responsibility to schedule the inspections. I will admit that I have gone to the lab manager's manager before when the designated person who was responsible for setting it in the calendar didn't do it, right? Because I'm not going to do it for him. That doesn't make any sense because our system requires it. But I don't think I would go to, we call them heads of function here. I don't think I would go to a head of function with saying, their lab self-inspection was awful. I think that's a coaching thing for the team.
Good. Coaching is a good way to put it. And yeah, I think it would be a good way to decimate the program by turning it into something that you're not trying to do. In the chat, Shade commented, we tell our teams the assessments are non-punitive and to help with their compliance, which is nice. And I'm sure also from the discussions help with their safety culture, especially towards Patrick's comments in the Q&A and in the chat about best practices versus compliance and what we're trying to get people to help themselves with, which is nice. Well, I think this is going to be the last really quick one. And we may have kind of covered it, but Nikki had asked before, who do you find I'm not sure if we talked about it. Who do you find are the ones filling it out? So is it PIs, scientists? Is it grad student workers? Is it a lab coordinator, a department person? Who all do you find, or are you perhaps not sure, or maybe don't even care as long as it's being done well? And I give up. I'm just going to ask I'll ask you all three to answer at the same time. No, just kidding.
Yes.
Stacy, Stacy, why don't you go first on this one?
The answer is yes. It's a mix of people, right? Because we've got some labs where we've had a plethora of volunteers who want to take a lead. We've had some labs where they've had to be voluntold because somebody has to take ownership. So it just depends.
Got it. I'm going back across because that's easy on my brain and it's tired. Josanne, what about you?
Definitely a mix of different types of people or roles doing this also, not just the PIs. You have students, volunteers, lab managers, coordinators who take the initiative to do it.
Nice, great. Loan-Anh, you get the last on this one. and I'll just wrap us up. I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Yes, it's usually the lab manager, the lab delegates. That's time with this PI, but when the PI is involved, you know, that's a great lab culture that you can see. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's great. I wanted to just say how much I appreciate everyone participating in this. It was just a blast doing this. A great topic. Thank you so much to our panelists. Josanne, Loan-Anh, Stacy, all for contributing your time and knowledge to this, and everyone who came. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much. And I think that wraps us up. So for everyone here on the BioRaft team, thank you again for coming, and we hope to see you at future webinars. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Josanne
everyone.
and Stacey. Thank you so much. I learned so much from everyone here today as well.